toothbrush you don't remember buying stands beside yours. A chair you always leave angled toward the window faces the door. The house smells faintly of someone else's soap, and your keys aren't where you left them, only closer, as if placed back by a stranger trying to be considerate. The emptiest rooms are never quiet. They listen, and sometimes they answer. This is Mr. BlackWhisper. I learned the shape of my apartment the way you learn a body, by light, by sound, by how it wakes. Pipes ticked behind the bathroom wall at 5:12 every morning. The radiator coughed before it warmed. My upstairs neighbor walked like he taught himself to tiptoe late in life. When you live alone, these become your weather. On a Tuesday, I noticed a second toothbrush in my cup. Blue, cheap, still wet. I stood there, dripping on the bath mat, and felt something shift in the room, as if the walls inhaled. I told myself I must have bought it. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I'd grabbed it with toilet paper and dish soap, and my mind had filed the errand under static. I remember scraping the idea across my ribs until it smoothed enough to swallow. By Friday, the heat was late, and the radiator held its breath through the dawn. My window, which I never opened in winter, was loose on the latch. The blue toothbrush had moved to the sink. I set it back in the cup and took a photo. It's a terrible thing to need proof inside your own home. Nothing else was wrong. The door showed no scratches. The deadbolt slid easy. I told myself I was tired. Night shifts do that. They turn rooms into mirrors that reflect the hour you came home, not the hour it is. The next morning, the toothbrush was gone. Relief made me dizzy. I thought of cleaning crews, of landlords checking radiators. I texted the property manager. He sent a shrug emoji and said no one had keys but me. He said I should relax. I stared at that word until it meant nothing. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of a cabinet closing. Not slammed, pressed gently shut, the way you do when you care who's sleeping. I lay still, listening to the air. The building was an old brick cutout full of people I pretended didn't exist. The hallway rustled sometimes. The elevator sang off-key around floor 3. But this sound came from feet away, from the kitchen where my burnt pan waited to be forgiven. I rose carefully. The boards know your weight, and mine complained. I hated that. I hated that my home tattled. My phone light shook in my hand and threw a sick little circle across the counter. The sink was dry. The cup held only my toothbrush. The cabinet, bottom left where I keep the pan, stood slightly ajar, a fingertip's distance. I closed it and felt the soft give of someone's oil on the knob. That smell again. Not mine. A clean, bland soap with a chalky aftertaste. I followed it like a blind person follows heat. The ceiling hatch to the crawl space above the hallway looked wrong. Dust sifts a certain way when air moves. The paint around the latch was scuffed newer than the rest. I put the chair under it and climbed. No ladder, no plan. Just a tilt toward the one square of my life that had never mattered until it did. The hatch lifted with the sigh of a secret just tired enough to confess. Darkness at first. Then the weak geometry of joists and the rumor of insulation. My phone light trembled across a sleeping bag, an empty water bottle, a stack of folded clothes, small and careful, a notebook, and, because there is always something that makes it real, a half-pack of blue toothbrushes. I didn't scream. That surprised me. I only heard my breath discover new lengths. I backed down, closed the hatch, moved the chair away to make the ceiling look undisturbed again, and sat on the floor with my phone in my hands until the battery went from 30% to 16%. When the police came, they were kind and loud and made every doorway wide. They told me stories about crawl space people, about custody battles, about friends who kept keys they weren't supposed to. They promised extra patrols. The officer with the gentlest voice suggested changing locks, moving, keeping the chair under the doorknob at night. I nodded like a drowning person nods at a rope. They found fingerprints. They matched none on file. They found the sleeping bag, the clothes, the notebooks filled with steady, tidy handwriting, lists of what I owned. Times I left, times I returned. When my radiator coughed, when my showers ran long, 2 Polaroids taken from the hatch mouth, looking down at my hallway, the first with the ceiling light off, the second with it on. I stood in the second one, blurry, reaching to brush my teeth. They never found him. Maybe he'd moved on to another ceiling. Maybe he'd gotten spooked by the police and carried his notebook like a new toothbrush to somewhere else that smelled unclaimed. I slept at a friend S for a week and learned the shapes of her house. A curtain that breathed, a cat that walked like a different person each night. When I returned, my home was exactly as I left it. Which is to say, not mine anymore. I taped the hatch shut and repainted the scuffs, and I still looked up every time I passed, the way you look at an old scar you can feel before you see. I keep 2 toothbrushes now. They match. It's easier that way. If one is wet, I tell myself I showered twice. If a cabinet is polite in the night, I tell myself I am too. The unforgettable part isn't what I found above me. It's what I felt below, how the apartment softened, like a throat when it recognizes the voice that calls. Someone had been living on my schedule without ever speaking, close enough to smell my soap and learn my sleep. If you listen, you can still hear him in the pipes at 5:12, not walking, not talking, just waiting for me to brush. He liked the way I kept my bedtime. Night shift leaves a film on everything. Your food tastes like the hour before dawn. Your clothes carry other people's fevers. Your apartment smells too clean, like a hotel trying to convince you of safety. I would come home and let the quiet find my bones. I would shower the corridor in my head until it felt wider. That winter, I started waking at 3:14. Not 3:13, not 3:15. My body learned a number the way a lock learns a key. I'd sit up, hear the fridge hum, watch the white sliver of streetlight crawl across the closet door, and tell myself a story. You're fine. No one knows your hours. No one watches a window that never moves. On a Sunday, I felt watched anyway. I kept noticing small orders changed. My keys angled differently on the hook. My mug rotated so the chip I always face inward looked out, like an eye. You can laugh at these things in daylight. At 3:14, they are gospel. I set my phone on the bookshelf that faces my bed. I told myself I needed a new habit. I fell asleep holding that thought like a hand. At 3:14, I woke to the soft click of plastic on wood. Not loud. A syllable, not a sentence. My phone screen glowed faintly and went dark. I lay still and counted my breaths until I could stitch them into one thread. The room smelled like someone's cologne worn years ago and kept in a drawer. Old, ghostly, masculine. It hung at knee height, like someone had been sitting. Morning made everything thinner. I checked the front door, locked. I checked the window, latched. I checked the closet, empty enough to echo. I went to work and told myself this was just whatever ex-night shift nurses become when they live alone long enough to name shadows. On break, I opened my photo roll to send a dumb meme to a coworker who believes ghosts hate fluorescent lighting. The most recent picture wasn't a meme. It was me, asleep, taken from the angle of my bookshelf, where ID left my phone, close enough that my breath fogged the lens into a soft halo around my face. The timestamp said 3:14. I stopped being a person for a minute. I went somewhere inside my body that was both deeper and farther away. A narrow hall where all the doors are closed but the air still moves. When I came back, I saw more. The reflection in the window behind me. Not a face. A shape, tall and slight, standing where the closet ends. The lines were soft because the room was soft, but there was the suggestion of a shoulder, the slope you get when someone leans to look. I sent the photo to my own email in case I lost my phone. I sent it to the property manager. I went home to pack a bag and suddenly understood the sound I'd heard. The volume button makes that click when a picture is taken. I'd always kept the sound on without noticing. Someone had noticed. The police were exactly as tired as me and better at it. They checked the door, the windows, the fire escape I never used. No pry marks, no new scratches. My building had badge entry on the front. The officer asked who else had a key. I said only the manager. The manager frowned like the word "only" offended him. He gave the police a list of maintenance guys. One had been fired 2 months earlier for sleeping in empty units. He had a key he was supposed to return. He hadn't. They went to his mother's house. They didn't find him. They did find a shoebox filled with mementos, napkins with apartment numbers, key tags, a ring of unlabeled keys, and a handful of printed photos. People sleeping. People brushing their teeth. People watching TV. None of me, thank God, or luck or timing. The manager changed the locks building wide that night. I moved my bed so the window wouldn't hold me like a dark picture frame. I put my phone inside the dresser when I sleep. It doesn't matter. I wake at 3:14 anyway, and the room is always listening. The photo is still on my email. I look at it sometimes and study the reflection until it isn't a person anymore but a smudge, and then a trick of angle, and then nothing at all. That's how I live with it. I unmake the shape until I can breathe. The unforgettable part? It isn't the photo. It's the revelation that someone sat close enough to hear my breath change, close enough to touch my shoulder and didn't. Not because he shouldn't, but because he didn't need to. He'd already taken what he came for. You sleep differently after someone shows you what your face looks like in your own home, when you are not awake to defend it. He liked me best with my eyes closed. I took the house because it was cheap for the distance it put between me and everything I used to know. 1 lane, 2 turns, a mailbox that leaned toward the road like it was tired of introductions. The realtor said, "Quiet." She meant the nearest neighbor was a field. The first snow arrived like a mercy. It softened the edges of the world and gave the house something it had been missing: proof. You can look at a yard full of white and know what crossed it: fox, coyote, stray dog, the light tracks of birds that resemble handwriting dropped by a hurried god. Monday morning, I opened the back door for air and saw footprints coming from the tree line to my porch. Heavy, direct, no wandering. They stopped at the threshold and did not turn back. The snow beyond them lay unbroken. My breath made a little fog that felt too loud. I closed the door. I locked it. I went to the front window and scanned the yard, the gravel drive, the road dressed like something else under all that white. No other tracks, just those. Coming here. People explain footprints, snow slides, wind complicates. A person might have walked backward. People know tricks. The quiet inside me had a different idea. They're under the porch. The crawl space vent was a black rectangle at knee height beneath the kitchen window. I watched it until my coffee learned how to cool. Nothing moved. I told myself to shovel, to go outside and write my own proof across the yard. I stayed where I was and listened to the house settle like an animal that wants you to know it's bigger than you thought. By afternoon, the sun had skinned each footprint with a thin sheet of ice. You could see the tread pattern of a boot, the slight drag on the left foot. The prints still didn't leave. I went to bed early and woke to a dull creak beneath the kitchen. Old boards talk in a language of age and weight. This sound had an answer. It wasn't history. It was now. I called the sheriff. He arrived in a truck that grew the room of my porch by a whole person. He took one look, then another, then squatted by the vent and shone his light into the dark. He leaned in far enough that the beam caught the shine of 2 eyes looking back. There was a scramble, a cough of dust, and the shape reversed itself into shadows I couldn't see. The sheriff swore softly, stepped back, and drew his breath into something that made sense. "Sir," he said, voice level, "crawl out slow." His light moved in a careful, steady circle, never touching the place a person frightened might hide. The man who crawled out looked like anyone you'd pass in a grocery store you weren't shopping in. Mid-30s, thin in the way that suggests waiting. He had a knife on his belt and a flashlight with black tape around the handle. He kept looking at my kitchen window instead of at us. When the sheriff cuffed him, the man said almost politely, "I like the radio. He glanced toward the sill where I keep a little speaker. I could hear it when you cooked. He had cigarettes under the porch, a sleeping pad, a blanket rolled tight, a bag with zip ties, a copy of the local free paper with my address circled. He had a small notebook with a page that read, Wednesday, 7:32, light off, footsteps slow. Thursday, 6:15, sings while washing. Friday, closed curtain early. People came after. Another deputy, a tow, a woman with a county jacket who took pictures of the underside of my home like it was a delicate animal. They told me he'd been living along the creek bed, using the drainage culvert to move unseen. That explained why his tracks didn't return. He'd come under the porch and never left the way he arrived. I replaced the vent with a lockable grate and learned the sounds of the kitchen again, this time with the drumbeat of that night beneath everything. For weeks, I couldn't stand at the sink without imagining eyes at knee level. I closed the curtains at 4 in the afternoon because light felt like invitation. The unforgettable part wasn't seeing him. It was hearing the politeness in his voice when he said he liked the radio, like we were neighbors on a stoop instead of two people meeting where one had been listening to the other breathe. It was feeling how thin the boards were between us, how kind a house can be while it still lets someone learn your footsteps from below. I still cook in silence. He didn't like when the windows were closed. I was new to the city, and the building was proud of itself. It had a keypad entry and a list of amenities painted in friendly font near the mailboxes. My unit smelled like fresh paint and an argument between old pipes and new tile. I told friends I was fine. I learned how the elevator hesitated between floors like it sometimes forgot where I lived. One afternoon, a man knocked wearing a bright vest and carrying a tablet. He had a patch that said water. He smiled like a minor apology. He said there had been a pressure issue in the stack and he needed to check valves in each unit. His voice had the calm of a person who does this a lot. He knew names, said management, and the manager's first name, which I recognized from emails. He stood at that angle people use when they want you to feel like they already in the doorway. I don't know why I didn't move. I asked for ID. He raised the tablet. The screen showed a logo and a ticket number, and something that looked like my address, but not exactly. He said those systems are always slow, always wrong. He laughed lightly and waited for me to laugh too. I didn't. My phone said the water company's number was calling. The man nodded toward it, helpful. He watched me answer. The voice on the line sounded like a call center reading a script about pressure checks in our area, and a technician at my door named Mark. I looked at the man. He spread his hands like a magician revealing an empty hat. I said I'd call management. The call hung up. The man's smile didn't crack. It changed nothing. I can come back, he said, warm, without moving his feet. I didn't open the door. He left without being affronted. He walked down the hall at a speed that said he belonged. I called the manager. He said no one was scheduled. He said they never, ever let anyone into units without 24 hours notice. He said, his voice tightening like a knot, to lock my door and wait. Later, the police came. They told me about caller ID spoofing, about people who dress like workers and move through buildings because doors are heavy and most people feel rude about making them stay closed. They asked for a description. I gave one that would fit any man who wants you to feel bad about your own caution. That night when I dumped my mail on the counter, a small metal key slid across the wood. I knew it wasn't mine because it looked like it belonged to a different language. Long, thin, with a square head, stamped with numbers. The building engineer later told me it was a universal meter key, the kind that opens utility boxes. It had been slipped into my mailbox slot like a calling card. Days bled into each other. The elevator forgot me more often. Once late, I stepped out on my floor and heard quick footsteps behind me. I turned and saw no one. The stairwell door sighed. I stood there listening to my heart mispronounce my name. The manager offered to move me to a different unit. I said no. You can't outrun a type of person. You can only make your door heavier. I added a bar, I checked the peephole glass for scratches. Sometimes I heard a soft tap at the water cabinet in the hallway, the little locked square where the valves live. Tap, pause, tap. The sound of a person testing whether you're paying attention. Weeks later, the news carried a story about a man arrested in a neighboring building. He'd been posing as a utility worker, entering units when people were home alone to inspect, taking small things, soap, dish towels, sometimes keys. Things you might not miss for days. He kept a notebook of times and names. He liked to stand in kitchens. He liked to ask for water. They never tied him to my building. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe I saw a ghost of a job I didn't want to understand. But I still think of that metal key on my counter, cold enough to share its temperature with my skin. I still think of the way he occupied the doorway like he knew that most of us are kinder than our fear, that we will open a little just to prove it. The unforgettable part? Feeling how easily official language can enter your home. How a vest and a patch and a phone call can make your hand move toward the deadbolt like the word water is a password to your life. He didn't need to force the door. He just needed me to be helpful. People think the worst part of living alone is the noise. It isn't. It's the routine. The way your habits build a map only you ever see. The way you can tell time by the sound of your own appliances. My microwave ends at the same cheerful beep every morning when I heat oats. I always stop it with 1 second left to avoid the beep. It's silly, but it feels like control. The day I came home to the microwave reading 0001, I stood there longer than the second required. I hadn't eaten that morning. I'd left in a hurry, late for a meeting, coffee sloshing down the side of a cup I forgot to wash. The microwave's paused eye watched me like we were mid-conversation. There was a mug in the sink I didn't use. A spoon dried with a pattern I don't make. My chair angled slightly wrong. Again, that small, considerate wrongness. The kind that says a person wanted to put your world back the way they think you like it. I checked the door, locked. The window, latched. The balcony. Empty but for the plant I pretend to water. I told myself cleaning staff, landlord, inspector, mix-up. I told myself a stranger would have taken something obvious. The TV, the laptop. He wouldn't have made oats and left the last second like a signature. That night, I slid a piece of tape over the door's edge. Not because it would stop anyone, because it would tell me what I already feared. Morning came. The tape was still whole. My stomach felt like a room with no furniture. I set up a camera, the cheap kind that sends a notification when it hears a sound, and went to work. My phone buzzed 3 times around noon. Movement detected in kitchen. I opened the app in a fluorescent hallway that smelled like reheated noodles and copier ink. The feed showed my kitchen, empty, light moving across the floor in the slow language of sun. Nothing else. When I got home, the camera sat face down on the counter. The notification wasn't wrong. Movement had happened. The camera had seen it, and then gone blind, as if someone had placed a hand over a mouth. I looked in places I had never looked in my own home. Behind the fridge, under the bed, inside the storage ottoman full of winter scarves. I stood with my ear to the wall and listened to air like a suspect. Then I remembered the note my landlord had slipped under my door last month about showings. He'd decided to sell. He said he'd give 24 hours notice. He hadn't shown it yet. I called him. He sounded busy, then offended, then slippery. He said he'd never given anyone a key without me present. Then he said maybe his assistant had. Then he blamed a miscommunication and promised it wouldn't happen again. He didn't sound like a person who had stood in my kitchen. He sounded like a person who would send someone who would. I changed the lock on my dime and bought a bar for the door. I moved the camera higher. I tried to be a person whose oats beeped again. But one night, really late, I woke to the soft, wet click of my microwave door opening and closing. Once, twice. A pause, then the sound of a finger tapping the Add 30 seconds button. Silence. Then the door again, closing just shy of the click that would have started the countdown if someone hadn't decided they liked the second before better. I stayed in bed. I counted the seconds I could not see. The sound didn't repeat. When I finally went to the kitchen, my feet gentle on the board that always tells on me, the display read 0.01. A sticky note leaned on the counter. It said, "Sorry, thought you were out. Almost finished." No name. A smile that felt borrowed. The building's security cameras caught a man leaving at 2:12 a.m., wearing a baseball cap low, carrying nothing. He walked like someone who trusts cameras because he does nothing illegal. The landlord swore he didn't know him. The real estate agency swore they'd never schedule a showing at night. The police shrugged in the way people do when your locks aren't their job. I installed a secondary lock high and one low, like belts on a scared person. I stuck a small piece of tape inside the microwave door. It always tears now, by me, by anyone. It's a reminder of what attention costs and what it sometimes buys. The unforgettable part isn't the note or the second on the display. It is realizing someone felt so at home in my home that they adopted my habit without knowing it. That he learned it just by standing in my kitchen and watching the light change and the seconds fall, and he stopped it at 1 because that's how I live here. Always a second away from the sound I don't want to hear. He almost finished. And if you live alone long enough, you learn to stop your life right there too, at 001, quiet, polite, waiting for a noise you've trained yourself never to make.